Who are you?
I am Michael Kaplan. I'm a technical lead. I used to work on the globalization infrastructure fonts and tools team. However, we just got renamed this morning.
Oh, really?
Yes. We are
So
now,
I'm right in time. We didn't plan this out.
Yeah,
People are going to start worrying, oh shit, Scoble's going to show up, we're going to get reorged or something.
yeah, no. They've changed the name to GPTS Engineering. Now,
Okay.
GPTS is our parent organization. It's global platform tools and something or other. But the idea is that we're the engineering arm of that.
Okay.
And it includes a lot of the test resources that used to be other places, and dev and PM and pretty much everybody.
And what do you guys focus on?
Are
Are you still focused on internationalization?
It's definitely internationalization, but there's so many different areas, because there's does the language work just if I'm trying to type in somebody else's language, or how is Windows localized, or are the fonts there to support whatever I'm trying to type in, or even the localization tools, and are they in place? And we pretty much have to provide the support for all those things.
Now, how many languages is Windows Vista being planned to release on?
If you include the partial localizations, it is over 100.
Wow. And when you say partial, what do you mean?
Well, a while back, they kind of realized that localizing Windows is expensive because there are tons of strings, but most of them aren't quite as important. I mean, the advanced dialog for an obscure driver that had a help topic come up that almost nobody ever sees maybe doesn't need to be translated into Hindi to still get a Hindi localization. So they worked out a plan where they tried to grab the most compelling, most important resource strings that you see, or most likely to see, localize them instead. The theory was kind of an 80-20 rule, but in practice it actually varies from market to market, because they find that certain people in a country might prefer certain dialogues to be translated.
Right.
But you end up with an experience that looks like a localized product.
Yep.
It actually segued into the starter edition, which we were behind a lot of the original moves for it, which are these partial localizations that are actually meant for Windows in developing markets, where you need a cheaper version of Windows that maybe doesn't have all the functionality, but you want to be able to get it in your language, because maybe you don't speak English, and you want to get it in Hindi or Thai or whatever language you speak.
So what is the process of localization? Is it as simple as getting somebody here to translate the English to German, or
well,
to a developer? Because you're a developer here, right?
I'm a developer.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I'm a technical lead, which is sort of somewhere in between developer and PM.
Okay.
It's actually weird. You can obviously just go up to Babelfish, altavista.com, and immediately get a translation of something, but localization is a much deeper process. In fact, people used to play games with Babelfish where you'd round trip a string a few times and see how it mangled your text. And that's sort of what happens, because a localizer is somebody who can actually speak the original language, speak the target language, and also knows about what are the things that they use. The example I always use is the word form, like on a Visual Basic or C# a form. In Spanish, it could be forma or formulario. It could be either one, because those are both words that in theory you could translate to. But in practice, only one is used. So in a marketplace, somebody has to understand that developers who speak Spanish would use a certain one, because otherwise they might understand it, but they'll say, this product isn't really localized into our language. Somebody just ran it through a Alta Vista and didn't actually do the right job. So it's actually pretty hard, because you have to speak both languages, understand technologies, and actually track down issues that might even be core bugs instead of localization bugs, just because nobody gave you the right information.
Interesting. Localization to me means a lot more than translation, though, right? What happens if you convert an English string that's, this big, and it turns into a German string that's this big, and it doesn't display properly or something like that?
Oh yeah, once you get into those issues, then it gets even more complicated. I was just talking about the conceptual side.
Yeah.
The practical side of strings that truncate because languages that are just longer and need more room to express themselves. A lot of the bugs that actually come up related to localization and pseudo-localization, where they insert things in there to make the string look longer so we can find the bugs, actually boiled down to people not properly making the dialogue big enough for that particular case.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting side effects of that. For example, in Japanese, you don't tend to be wider because obviously it takes up less room, but the fonts have to be bigger. So at 9-point or 10-point, you often run out of room in the vertical direction instead of the horizontal direction. So you pretty much need to test in a lot of languages to get a good feel for what's there.
And there's some languages that you read right to left too, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
does that mess with
right to left changes things hugely because you essentially almost want a mirror experience where you actually reverse everything. So if it was something in the upper right-hand corner, you expect it to be in the upper left-hand corner. And for that to work, you really need either a mirroring technology, which Windows does have, or you need localizers who are literally going to move all of the various controls in the dialogue around, which is obviously really hard to do and expensive.
And do well.
Right, so which is why mirroring is so much more common, where it'll just automatically flip everything.
Interesting. What's your job like then? I mean, you're the first internationalization expert I've ever met.
Okay. Well,
there's probably kids at school going, man, I never even thought of that as a career path.
Well, it's actually really interesting.
Now, how many languages do you need to know? Other languages?
Well, that's actually the interesting part of it, because I'm an expert in all kinds of individual features of languages without actually being able to fluently speak them. So I understand a lot about Arabic code points in Unicode and the way things shape, the way you sort Tibetan script languages. However, I don't have the information about like how I would actually converse in the language. So I'm an expert of something I know nothing about.
Interesting. Hey, hopefully, that sounds like a Microsoft employee right there.
No, but it's actually very interesting because it's sometimes very hard. You know, if you're a developer on the base team and the networking, you know, you understand everything about a certain protocol. You really can get into it and understand it all.
Yeah.
However, there is no chance that I'll be able to learn every single language that we're trying to cover. So I mean, there are other development jobs that are like that, but it's one of those jobs where you can't know everything. You're basically building a framework that lots of things can fit into. And
interesting.
All you can do is do your best to make sure the framework will fit everything.
Now, what kind of tools do you work with? Do you still play with Visual Studio, or do you have other tools that you
I actually do. I find myself using the command line for a lot of simple repros for a lot of different things. But Visual Studio is a nice, easy way to, plug in. Especially a lot of repros come to us in simple Visual Studio projects, right. And a lot of bugs come to us when they actually are in other products. Obviously maybe they're not using one of our APIs to sort or to get a date or something like that. So bug comes to us because of the poor internationalization, and we then have to forward it to the actual team that wasn't calling our API. Or sometimes, there's bugs in ours occasionally.
Yeah.
Not very often.
What kind of tips do you have for developers who are maybe entering a market that they know will need to be internationalized at some point in the future, and maybe that's not top of their mind, but what kind of mistakes do you... mistakes and tips.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. The biggest thing to do is to plan ahead.
Okay.
When I say plan ahead, you want to make sure that you're writing code that is using... If you're in the .NET framework, using the globalization classes. Or if you're in traditional Win32, using the NLS APIs. And the reason you want to do that is because even if you're just in English, there's a lot of advantages to having the right date formats come up, for a particular user. The other thing you want to do is use Unicode. Hugely important. In fact, even if you're never going to translate to any other language whatsoever, the system is Unicode. So if you're not, every single time you do something, it's going to convert in and convert back out. So you're actually slowing down your performance. And if you think about it, everyone wants a fast application, so it's always better to just be Unicode.
Now, for a VB programmer or a C# programmer, what does that mean?
Well, for VB and C#, your strings are Unicode, so you actually are Unicode by default. But there's a couple little tricks that they did for kind of backwards compatibility reasons, where if you're adding one of the pinvoke statements, the default char set might not be Unicode, and so you want to make sure you're specifying it. And it was actually the old problem with VB was the strings, even in VB 5 and 6, the strings were Unicode, but every time you tried to do something with them, it would convert them and convert them back. So it was great storage, but it was twice the storage space with none of the benefits of international support.
Got it.
Now they've fixed a lot of those things, and all the .NET Framework languages are Unicode to the core. But there's a couple legacy things where they said, well, if you're writing to a text file or if you're calling an API, you're probably calling the ANSI version instead of the Unicode version, so let's convert for you. And you can lose data that way.
Got it.
In Hindi, there's almost nothing that will fit on one of those code pages. So unless your users speak fluent question mark, then it's not going to be a good experience for them.
So, and that's what the bad experience when something comes from another language. It's all, I get emails like that, right? Which I don't have the font loaded up for Chinese or Japanese, and it looks like a bunch of jarbled text, right?
Oh yeah, a lot of times actually with emails, it's often it doesn't know what the character set is, so it guesses incorrectly, and nothing's perfect. And I know that there's, if you get things in like Outlook Express, it tries to do a guessing using mlang, which we also own. But to guess what is the code page, and if it guesses wrong, then it comes back as gibberish to you. It's the same as if you had a code that you scrambled all the results of. Mm-hmm. You can actually right-click on it and choose the encoding and try to choose something different. Although if you don't speak the language, it wouldn't help you much anyway.
Nope.
So you get the spam in Chinese instead of whatever it thought it was. But then the question marks actually come if there's just a bad conversion, like to Unicode. Okay. And question mark is a great character for the default. It's the I don't know what to translate it to, so I gave up.
I get that sometimes when I copy things from web documents into my blog post editor, and it doesn't convert sometimes smart quotes into straight quotes. It doesn't understand those,
right?
That kind of thing. You got anything to show us today, or?
Let me think.
How's the Windows Vista going to change? I see you have the new build of Windows Vista on there.
Yes, I do.
Or a relatively recent one.
Relatively recent. Well, actually built yesterday.
Excellent. How's Windows Vista going to change for international for people who speak multiple languages? How's it going to be better or worse?
Well, of course, there are the additional languages that it's being translated into. There's a lot of new locales hovering around the 200 mark in Vista. Although every time we've given the number, it seems to go up a little bit. I remember Kathy Wasink and I, she's a program manager here, we did a presentation at Unicode a couple of years ago talking about how there'll be 180 languages in Longhorn, because there wasn't a Vista at the time. And then every time we do the presentation, we had to keep upping it. We wanted one of those little McDonald's signs that would flip the numbers so we wouldn't have to keep on changing the slides.
Wow.
But in addition to that, a lot of support for languages that have never been seen on Windows or even other computer systems before, like Sinhalese, Yi, Mongolian, Vertical Mongolian, which, I can actually appreciate the beauty of scripts that I don't understand sometimes, because sometimes they are just really beautiful. And being able to see them on the machine is really incredible, especially if you are a native speaker who doesn't speak English.
Yeah. Now, are these going to be loaded by default, or will I have to download a little pack to see them?
They will be in the product by default. One of the biggest complaints people had in previous versions was they had to check these 2 checkboxes to get at the full international support, only maybe they weren't admins, so they couldn't check the checkboxes to install files and change registry keys. So actually, out of the box, every language will be supported. The fonts will be there. You'll be able to do everything you need to.
Wow. And since it's there by default, I assume like Internet Explorer 7 that's built in there will support these same languages. Right?
Oh yeah, Internet Explorer. It actually Internet Explorer
Solitaire.
uses. Oh yeah, all those things. Yeah. It'll support, I mean, Solitaire doesn't have strings in them that you would enter yourself.
Right.
But certainly, if you're putting in your high score and you're putting your name in, you could put any characters you want.
Interesting.
It'll work.
Interesting. Now, do you have to? Let's say I was a French and an English speaker. Is there some way to switch the languages?
There is.
Is it?
There is. It's actually called the multilingual user interface.
Okay.
And that's the ability to, because maybe you have a family and not everybody speaks the same language, or more realistically, you're a huge company that might have a server where many people are logging in around the world, and they want to be in their language so they can actually understand a word of what's going on.
Yeah.
They can log on, and their profile, they can choose what language they want to see it in.
Can you keep the screen English and type in French or type in
certainly, always. I mean, that's been in every
or vice
version of
versa,
Windows.
right?
Yeah,
I've heard that
all
request
those things
before.
Yeah, no, definitely, and that's one of the core things that our team does. The globalization services part of our team, where we're actually making sure that no matter what language you're using here, you can type in any other language or get information in any other language.
Now, developers that build apps that sit on top of Windows Vista, do they have to do anything special to get that scenario to work properly?
they obviously have to have the additional resources. So and we don't auto-translate from English to French for you.
Right.
Because we're not quite there yet. And certainly if you, so we had to translate them to French, so you would have to do the same thing. There's a lot of best practices information about how to make sure that you have an application that if the user went and changed their UI language to French or Hindi or Russian, whatever, you can make your language change as well.
Okay.
And Office is our biggest, kind of our Uber customer for that sort of thing, because they actually want the same experience. And when you get down to it, people don't usually have to interact with Windows services as much as application services. For as far as huge UIs they have to look at. So in some ways, the Office side of MUI is more important because they need to see, everything that's in Word translated so they can understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And they depend on our infrastructure to do the work, but the user doesn't notice us. So that's when we're doing the best job.
Cool. So what do you got here?
Let me see. Now, this is actually a sample that I had put together, and this was originally done for, Francois Ligier did this to show off how you could show all of the cultures that would be in the .NET framework.
Okay.
And it was just this little explorer that would, let's get some color in here. So it was just a little explorer that would show all of the various locales that were on the system.
Yep.
And you could go in and look at any one of them. So that's Azeri Cyrillic.
Okay.
And in Whitby, in .NET 2.0, we added the ability to create custom cultures and the ability to, if you're running on Windows, that obviously has additional languages that the framework doesn't know about, to actually synthesize a culture and create one that will only work on that version of Windows. And the reason is simple. If you buy Vista because you wanted support for Mongolian, and you try to use a managed application and it doesn't work, then you say, well, it's broken. Mongolian isn't in there. So we wanted to make sure that you would have a good experience if you wanted Mongolian. So we added these Windows-only cultures, and I made these small changes to Francois' application so you could actually look and see I changed to AMET, and now I'm looking at Amharic.
What does AMET stand for?
Oh, no, this is our name for our culture. So this is Amharic in Ethiopia.
Oh, wow.
So we're looking at the Amharic script. And, basically, it's sort of accidentally, because I wrote this, and I did this originally for the languages in XASP2, which was a nice small list, but then when I accidentally ran this on a Vista machine, the list was huge, and you can see this huge list of all of the different languages that are basically new for Vista. Never before seen anywhere else.
Wow, a lot of languages.
And it was really incredible to be able to see all those things work. The other thing, a lot of work happened in Windows Forms to make sure that if GDI Plus couldn't manage a language, that there'd be a way to use the system as well. So basically, with everybody trying to do the right thing, not necessarily trying to work together, but trying to do the right thing, we all sort of converged on something, and I changed 6 lines of code and created a cool sample.
That's cool. Now, if I was building a web page or an application that had to use multiple languages on the same form or on the same display, is there anything I have to do special to do that?
Well, you want to make sure it's Unicode, so it'll support all the languages, but beyond that, everything will work. One of the big scenarios that's important is the notepad scenario, where basically you're just typing a notepad, you want to switch the keyboard and have that work, and that's a core scenario for us, so it has to work.
Yeah.
In the world of Word, there's all kinds of tricks in RTF where you can actually embed different code page versions of things by specifying certain tags and stuff like that. But in Notepad, you don't have that. You just have plain text, so it's got to simply work. And Unicode's the easiest way to do that.
Very cool. And anything else I need to know about as either a user or as a developer on the system?
Things are getting easier. In fact, there was a lot of talk about people and their various commitments for their job and stuff, and I said for our group, 2 of our big commitments are, actually I have them on the whiteboard, it was opening it all up and getting out of the way.
Yeah.
We want to be able to open these things up, so we created a keyboard layout creator so people could create their own keyboards. And the reason we want to do that is we need to get out of the way, because people they think it's great that we're getting their language in there, but they don't want to wait. And they don't want to wait for the languages that are coming in the next version of Windows either. They want to maybe start now. So these custom cultures that .NET Framework supports actually become custom locales on Vista, which means if I create something, and in fact we used to joke, our language that we joke about that we're adding, it was Fijian, as spoken in Fiji. And I don't even know if it's a language, but it was funny to say because I'd say that I had to go do research in Fiji to find out about this great culture.
Did they approve the expense report for that one?
Well, they haven't yet, but so
you might get more recruits if you offer that. Hey, you got to go around the world and do research.
But so basically, if I create that in the .NET Framework, then I basically have created something that'll show up in Windows in regional and language options on the list, an equal citizen with every other language that we've done. Now, there are some ones that we haven't gotten to yet, because maybe one day they'll send us to Fiji, but there are other languages that maybe don't make sense for Windows, but are very important, like they're going to be adding hieroglyphics to Unicode. Obviously, researchers, that's crucial, but you wouldn't necessarily set your Windows locale to it, unless you're just playing around, because nobody cares about the different date formats. They care about data and processing. So you basically need a way to, perhaps you would care about it and you'd create a custom locale for it, even if it wouldn't make sense for Microsoft to do it. Yeah. There's also ones that we can't do because of various, regulatory restrictions, like for North Korea and things like that, where we really couldn't do things like that, but what people do on their own is what they do.
Now, how does Unicode work? Why is that different than ANSI text only?
Well, the main difference is there's no other encoding standard that covers all the languages in one place. Everywhere else, you basically had to switch between these various code pages. Code pages.
Does each character have a separate identifier then underneath?
In Unicode, yes, and in these other code pages as well. But there's not enough room for all of them. In fact, we were talking the other day about how for Chinese you'd have these code pages that have 20,000 code points in them. Well, if you look in Unicode today, there's about 70,000 Han ideographic type characters that are used in China, and maybe some of them are just in archival documents, but some of them are crucial. And if you're using a code page, you're missing 50,000 characters in your language, which is pretty big thing to be missing out on.
Yeah.
And there's actually more coming all the time because there's many archival documents that they're unearthing, and Unicode still seems to be getting new proposals for characters all the time. Now we're actually moving in Unicode into the dead language space, and things that are important for research, but maybe not as important for day-to-day email,
right,
and things like that.
After Windows Vista ships, I almost did it again too. What's your job going to look like? Is it over, or do you still have lots of challenges left?
There's still things to do. There's still things we want to open up, and it becomes important to decide what's the best way to do those things, because I have mixed feelings about the importance of things like open source in this area, and I'm not a zealot, but I find the idea of the customers of our support are not the techies, the people who are going to download binaries and recompile stuff or make changes or add their support for the language. They're people who speak a language, and a computer is something that they don't really want to have to make a career out of. They just want to be able to use it. Yeah. So how do we approach those people? So our version of opening it all up isn't open sourcing it and putting it up, dumping it over the fence, and people can do what they want. It's actually trying to create the tools and the methods and the classes in the .NET framework to make sure that you can actually get that support and make sure that things will work correctly.
That's a good question. How does Windows Vista compare to the Macintosh or Linux, the average Linux install, in terms of internationalization support?
International support is actually very interesting. At the moment, I think we are edging out a lot of them, mainly because of the work that we do in-house and with other companies related to font support and all the various shaping engines.
Yeah, Bill Hill was really proud of the new fonts that are being built for Windows Vista, right?
Yes, and it is a huge deal because that side of it. In fact, that's a side that even in the open source community, they kind of recognize that there needs to be money in that particular area because it's not something you can just give away for free. Yep. There's definitely some IP work there that anybody can recognize. There's artistry. you generally find that there could be individual...
Are you saying they don't always recognize the artistry of coders?
Well, they generally don't. I mean, I had a girlfriend a long time ago who was an author, and she would recognize that I would sometimes need to get up at 3 in the morning because I found a way to solve a certain bug, because she wrote fiction, and she'd say her character was whispering in her ear and she had to get the words down. So she understood it, and I said, maybe coding is a creative art, but most people don't see it that way, and it's very geeky to think of it that way, so I try not to.
Yep.
But, I don't know, where were we?
We were talking about comparison to other OSs and what the experience is going to be like for users.
In an individual
non-English
Linux install, it's very easy to imagine somebody would actually try to support their language. There isn't quite the same idea of kind of globally making sure all languages are there, but it's easy to imagine that one person could work hard to make sure their language would be supported. So I don't install random builds of Red Hat or various Linux installs to know what things are there. I do know that people all the time have questions about, if I have Windows and I also have Linux, can I use the fonts? And of course the answer is no there for those things. But the reason is because they really want to have that kind of rich support that we have there now. They have a version of OpenType, which is what we use, called FreeType, which is actually based on the spec that's actually now, it's an ISO spec, OpenType layout support of scripts. And they really are they're playing catch up at the moment for a lot of those things. And I think it's a big world and there's lots of room. I think at the moment we are truly being able to edge out a lot of those things, because a lot of these other competitors, because we just have a better product.
Yep. Well, cool. Anything else you want us to know about your world? Or?
Well, the other day I noticed, I had never tried it before, but I wrote the Keyboard Layout Creator. It's a managed application, written originally 1.0, and we updated for 1.1 a while back. It has an install program, but I was trying to repro a bug here on Vista, and I didn't feel like installing it, so I just copied all the files over, and it worked. I was amazed, because they always say that things work. So here we'll. So basically, this is our version. So if you look at the Mac version of what they did for custom keyboards, they created an extensible XML file format, so anybody could go in and edit and create a keyboard definition.
Yeah.
And that is a solution. Very compelling solution for people who understand XML and understand Unicode code points and understand how to actually modify things and do all that. In the real world, where people don't always know all those things, but maybe they understand, well, I wanted to have I wanted to take the existing keyboard that's there for Bulgarian, and I wanted to change one letter to be something else. And then I want that to be my keyboard. And so basically we wanted to create a visual experience, because it's a lot easier to understand something that looks like a keyboard that you're making small changes to than something that is an XML file that you may understand or may not. So really, for the tools and the interfaces we create, we're trying to create things that people can use.
Wow.
More directly.
That's interesting.
And actually, the tool has actually been picked up by a lot of other purposes, like accessibility, because
I believe it, because you could put whole words into keyboards. Wow, and you could build a chording system too. If you were really geeky, if you were really geeky, you could do
very geeky,
or you could do a Dvorak keyboard layout if you weren't into the QWERTY keyboard layout.
Oh, right, and in fact, a lot of people complain about how for keyboard layouts we have for the U.S. we have all these different, like Dvorak for left-handed ice miner who lost his right thumb in a bizarre accident, and we have a keyboard for that, but we don't have for other languages. And well, the question is, now you can just write your own. All over the web, I actually see installers that are actually built with this, so I say, aha, people are using the tool. It's great.
Awesome.
It was very fun for licensing. We weren't sure what to do originally, so we kind of wanted to work on, we didn't want people charging for them. So basically the license, the way it reads is, you can, any keyboard you create, it's yours, you can do whatever you want, and the rule is you can't charge for the keyboard. Maybe if you're a font foundry and you have $1 million fonts, you can charge for those, but the keyboard got to be free. And the lawyers were confused at first, but then they
figured it out.
They figured it out.
Cool. Well, thanks for spending a little bit of time with me, showing me
sure.
the world of internationalization. It's a
Sure.
great job you're doing. Thanks.
Awesome.